Hi there, welcome to Games Over Coffee Consulting. People give me their games, I give feedback on their game design. My name is Devon, and today we're talking about Mech Shuffle by Pillbug Games. I don't think I've ever received a deck building game before on this channel, so that's really interesting. I am not familiar with deck builders a whole lot. This is the gameplay right here. There we go. Mech Shuffle is a deck builder game that I think is a roguelite, and what's nice about it is that it's kind of simple. It's very simple to digest, as the dev put it. So this game was submitted to me by Pillbug Games, and they said, I worry that the game design may be too niche and that I'm following, is it niche or niche? Okay, so it's both. I worry that the game design may be too niche and that I'm failing to make the game engaging for a larger audience. I'd be very grateful for feedback. I feel like there's still time to course correct before the game leaves early access next year. Pillbug Games, I know you may not have thought about this as a quick fix, and I certainly hope that's not the way that you're thinking about this, because when you submit a game to me, I'm given game design feedback, and that's very much fundamental, to your gameplay overall. The things that I give on here, the advice that I give on here may not be able to be something that you can just put into your game, course correct, and then have it better. What I'm hoping to provide you with here is more or less information that you can internalize and use to make your game either better as you go along, or to use on your next game, or to use as a DLC or whatever. These are not hot fixes. These are not just things that we can put into the game and suddenly it's a little bit better. I feel like game design is much more fundamental. Although there are some things that you might be able to change on the fly, I don't believe these changes are going to make your game 100% different. With that being said, this is kind of the perfect situation that we have right here, because deck building is not something that I am interested in or something that I've really played before. I have tried 2 games, and I actually bought these games specifically so I could study them for this game, and that was Inscription and Slay the Spire. What seems to make Mech Shuffle different from other card games, in this one it's just abstracted a little differently. It's to where every time you play a card, your icon is added to the playing field. When you've gotten through all of your action points, then all of the icons come together and basically cancel each other out and acts like a math problem. So that means any attack that's on the field will attack the other opponent unless there's a shield that's in the way. You might have something like a delay icon holds until next turn. You might have something like a power up, a plus icon that powers up another card as soon as you play it. So the reason why I said that this is kind of like a perfect thing is because, like I said, I'm not very familiar with deck builders, and it's nice that this dev, who seems to be creating quite the niche product, wants to broaden their audience. So it's nice that I seem to be that kind of audience. I'll tell you the first thing that happened to me when I played this game. I thought it was so funny. I started it up and I was so confused. First of all, I do want to talk about the tutorial. I think the tutorial is nicely done. It's nice that it hones the player's focus. I really appreciate the effort that's gone into this tutorial. The tutorial, I think, skips over a bunch of things that I think the dev expects the player to understand already. And I think that's part of this niche kind of thing. So back to what I was saying. When I first played the game, even though I went through the tutorial, I did not feel like I understood almost anything. I understood some of the stuff, but most of what I was doing, I felt like I just didn't get it. I played a card when it told me to. I played something else when it told me to, and then things happened and I either won or lost, and I didn't understand. I had zero clue. I was so lost. And so what I did was I went to the Steam reviews to try to validate myself. There's got to be other people that feel very confused about this game, right? And I went into it and there was nothing but praise. There was a lot of praise in this game. They have actually a pretty good community in Steam. Everyone's talking about how great the game is. There was one person that said, hey, I bought this on a whim, 9 out of 10. I love this game. And so I was like, well, there's definitely a difference here between me and those people. And so I'm guessing what's happening here is that those people are ones who like deck builders, or at least are familiar with deck builders. They probably came across this game because they've played other deck builders. For me, I didn't understand the mechanics involved because I'm not familiar with them. So I want to talk about the tutorial, how we could change the tutorial to basically say more. The way that it's done right now, I think, is really good for people who understand deck builders from the get-go. Actually, let's take this step by step. So the very first thing that happens when you start the game, or when you start a battle, actually the very first thing that happens is you come to this menu. I don't know how exactly you did the sound effects for this menu, but I love moving my cursor between each of the selections because it feels like there's a random tone. So I must have spent like a minute just moving my cursor up and down, making a bunch of random tones, making music. Anyway, as soon as I started the game, then there is this tutorial that comes up. What we have is a little window that's in the center of the screen that says choose one card to play. So let's break that down. Okay, so what does that mean? Most people will understand what this means. Even if you're unfamiliar with what a deck builder is, choose one card to play. You understand that because this is a card game, you will choose a card from your hand and play it, which means that it goes into the game. However, when you're doing this and you pick up a card to play it, usually in a game like Slay the Spire, for example, it has a little description of what the card is and what it does. And in this instance, we don't have any information about what these cards actually do. We do know that there's an attack symbol on it. If you hover over the attack, it doesn't say how much damage it'll do though, and it doesn't really say when it's going to take place. So what's nice about video games though is that you really don't need those descriptions right up front. You can play something and then have the effect take place and then teach the player as they play. But in this instance, when we play the game, we're stacking. So we play the card, and then the icon just stays there in the middle and does nothing. Now we don't really know what has happened. The second sentence in here says each action point gives one play. In a deck building sense, that makes sense because people who know deck builders know that a play is a noun, right? A play means to take your turn, basically. But in people who haven't played deck builders, what does a play mean? And they could probably figure it out in their mind, but it's a little weird to use in this little tiny description box where it should be just immediately understood to use the word play as both a verb and a noun in two different ways. So I know I might sound like I'm nitpicking here because these are just small details, but the thing is that when someone comes in without any knowledge of any of this stuff, it kind of builds up on them and causes them to have this mental load of things that they feel like they should know until it gets to a breaking point to where they feel confused because they haven't understood a bunch of little things that then add up. The other thing that makes this a little confusing in the tutorial is that what we're doing is we're just having one basic battle. And the problem with that is that nothing is slowed down for us at all. There are the parts where we block out the other imagery, which I think is really nice because it, hones in the focus. But the player is still expected to know that all of these things are stacking together and that they all are applied at the same time afterwards. Because at the end of the round, all of these icons fly, wherever they need to. They all go really fast and they all go at the same time, and it kind of makes you feel like you're losing track of things if you haven't played this before. I had to play this a few times in order for me to understand that the icons all apply at the same time. Say one player were to play attack, attack, shield, and the other player also played attack, attack, shield. Because the action points are being taken at the same time, what I imagine happens is that both the attacks attack at the same time, then the next two attacks, then the next two shields, making each player take 2 damage, and then the last shields not do anything. But instead what happens is that everything is stacked together, and because they're all applied at the same time, then that means instead of taking 2 damage each, we're taking 1 damage each because the shield is blocking the attacks. That kind of mentality was a little hard for me to understand, this whole stacking mentality. And then if you add in more things like delayed attacks and delayed shields and more action points, those things confuse me a little bit more because I'm not sure exactly how all of this fits together. Once I understood that all of it was applied all at the same time, it did give me more confidence with that whole thing. But the thing is, if I don't have that confidence in the beginning, then I'm probably just going to leave the game. While I'm talking about this, some of the things that's coming to my mind is the dev did talk about how marketing was probably an issue for this game, which is a thing that a lot of devs should worry about when they're marketing their games. How good is their marketing and are they getting their game in front of the right people? What I'm trying to say is that even though you might have a really good onboarding, it still won't increase the amount of sales that you have because people still need to play the game first. So the two things that we really need to do in the beginning of the game to make sure that our audience is broad is to let them understand how the game works, but also increase their confidence in playing the game. There's a lot of board games out there that have, giant rule books, and the person who plays the game might be able to understand how the rules work, but won't have the confidence to actually play the game. That's one of the things that I think is really cool about video games, is that you can step through that process a little bit and you don't have to have the person understand all of the rules all at once. You can walk them step by step, and it's based on their interactions. So they have to actually put in some action to understand how the rules are going to work. But in order to build that confidence in the player, the dev really needs to limit the amount of errors that the player can do in the beginning. If we look at the first level in Portal, the player can't complete the level by mistake. They have to go over to a cube, pick it up, put it on a switch in order to go forward. And if they haven't done that, then they can't go forward. It's almost impossible to complete that by mistake. So with the deck building game, it really depends on the type of experience that you want to portray. In Slay the Spire, they don't really take away a lot of the errors that you can do. They limit them somewhat, but a player can still lose their first time playing the game, and they might not understand everything that's happening. However, it is important to know that Slay the Spire does do very well. The enemies are usually at least half of the health that the player has, so that the player has the upper hand when they start playing the game. That lets them build their confidence. If we look at a game like Inscription literally has you playing against another person, and this person passes. They choose to not play while they're playing the game with you, just so you can learn, so you can build that confidence. So depending on the experience that you want, if you wanted to step through this process and give the player that kind of confidence as they go forward, what I think you should do is introduce each of these things one at a time. I mean getting like really, really small with it. I mean like providing one action point to each person and saying that these are your turns, and then providing one card for each person, and this is an attack. Maybe the person plays the attack card and their opponent doesn't play anything. Maybe they pass, and the player understands that their card only does 1 damage. From there, you could have the opponent play different types of cards to cancel out the attacks, perhaps teaching how to shield. You could introduce things such as delays and heat. You could introduce the stacking by adding on more action points and letting the player play 2 cards this time and then 3 cards the next time. With stepping through each of these things and having a fixed designed outcome, what you're doing is you're teaching the player, with this tutorial. And you could perhaps make that type of tutorial only accessible for beginners, so if someone knows how to play deck builders, then maybe they can say, yeah, I don't want to hear the tutorial. I know how to play this type of game. I think having those types of interactions where you limit the amount of errors that the player can do as they go forward is probably the best method to increase their confidence. The player could go against mechs that have very small health, or mechs that don't have any attack cards, or maybe mechs that don't have any shield cards, things like that. As for the rest of the game, I feel like the game has pretty much everything covered. A lot of what we're talking about is just the onboarding process and making sure that the player understands everything as they go forward. Because I see a lot of good design in this game, and I don't see a lot of faults in the gameplay itself. A lot of it made sense once I understood what was happening, and once I gained that confidence that I could play a longer game. For me, myself, I just get a little overwhelmed when I have too many choices. So when I start doing things like trying to buff my attacks by adding multiple pluses and then delays and stuff like that, it starts to drain on me a little bit, and I'm not that interested in that type of gameplay. But if someone has a lot of confidence from the beginning, they might discover that they like this type of gameplay and they'll continue playing it. But if they don't understand from the very beginning, they might not get the chance to understand whether or not they enjoy deck builders. Thank you so much for submitting your game, Pillbug Games. If you are not this developer and you have a game and you want me to give you feedback on it, you can click the link in the description, or you can go to this website, gamesover.coffee. We also have a Discord where there's a lot of game developers that are just hanging out in there that sometimes will play test games if you want to. I'm always in there, so you can say hi and we can drink coffee. That's all I got for today, so thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you guys later.